Thinking Basketball Podcast. My name is Ben. Welcome back. It is another emergency episode because really, really crazy things are happening in the NBA. I can't stay away. I cannot keep myself away. I want to be one of these emergency podcast people that records right after the show ends. And so I just wrangle in whoever's willing to talk to me during these moments. And back by popular demand, I would say, it is Thinking Basketball's own Mike De La Rosa. How you doing?
Doing well. In a minor state of basketball hangover. I think that Nuggets Thunder game last night was the equivalent of having like 4 mezcal margaritas or something, but I'm ready to go.
Drink of choice, the mezcal?
That might be.
Yeah, let's start there because a lot has happened. We're recording this on Saturday, right as the Celtics have just ended their game against the Knicks. So all of the number 1 seeds are down 2-1 in this round. All of those number 1 seeds were the quote unquote inner circle title contenders we had all year. All those number 1 seeds won 60 games. I don't ever remember a situation like this in the second round with like 2 maybe even, but 3 juggernaut teams being up against it like this. They're all down 2-1. The Nuggets and the Thunder, to me, is the most interesting of the series. The basketball quality has been absolutely insane. The Nuggets were down most of the first game, came back, stole it, basically. That old cliche about stealing a game, although all the points count, all 48 minutes count. So I've never fully been on board with that one. But then game 2, the Thunder turn around, and they come back, and they're up by like 40 the entire game. I think they win by 43. They set the NBA playoff record. The entire history of every NBA playoff game that's been played over the last 70-something years, they scored 87 points in a half to start that game. Cooled way down, just 63 in the second half. This is worth mentioning, Mike, as the place to start for me, because the Thunder closed the game last night. I believe the final 13 minutes, they scored 11. Did they get 4 points in overtime or just 2? I can't even remember if they got a garbage time bucket at the very end of overtime. Basically, they were at like 93 with like 8 minutes left or something to go in the fourth quarter. And then at the very end of overtime, they were at 102. And that's not good. 11, like a point per minute or less than a point per minute is not good. It's a big problem. And the first half offense, some of it was really good process-wise. It got gunkier and gunkier as the game went. And so you have this almost comical math equation where they had 87 in the first half of game 2, 63 in the next half. Then it got a little tighter. The offense wasn't quite as good. And by the time you got to the end, it was like the 2004 Indiana Pacers playing the Pistons or something. They could just not score. What was the first thing that jumped out to you about this game?
Whew. Well, I mean, you could look at Jokic's stat line. I mean, that was probably the most inefficient playoff game I think I can remember him ever having. And I thought their defense was incredibly buttoned up on him. I think he definitely missed a few looks that I'd expect him to convert. But even if we start with something like the Jokic-Murray 2-man game or him up at the top of the key running pick and roll, the way that those Thunder guys can just get around screens and sort of stay attached to the ball handler means that the big man guarding Jokic can just shrink the gap on those pick and pop opportunities too. So it's not like he's missing like all of his shots that are wide open. It's like you're turning a semi-contested 3 into a little bit tighter of a contest.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, the way that they can also send a bunch of beefy bodies to him, in terms of whether they have 2 bigs on the floor or sending low help, timely double teams, switching with their guards who, like, Lou Dort is not a small man. I mean,
he's not that vertical, but he's thick.
He's wide. Yes.
Yeah. Did I send that into the group text, that idea about the guards staying more connected? Have we talked about this?
I don't think so.
This is crazy. That was one of my first things that I wrote down, because there's an entire process to how the Thunder are defending Jokic. And your original thought as a fan might be like, do they have all these special rules? Is it like the Lakers? Did they have some fancy game plan? And my answer to that would be not really. But you mentioned it. They made a change after game 1 to having what I like to call the beefy big one of those guys who's really thick, either Hartenstein or Jay Will, the other Jalen Williams, come in the game and body Jokic. They had a lot of success with double bigs defensively with Chet Holmgren. You mentioned the other guards. But the next thing is like, there's not much special after that. It's just organically the way Oklahoma City defends. And there's a couple sides to it. And the first one I wrote down is what you said. When you stay connected to all these actions and the Nuggets give the ball to Jokic or Murray has it and they're running these screening actions with 2 or 3 people, and you don't have to switch and the big doesn't have to leave Jokic's body to help, he never really gets his spots on the play. He never really gets deep in the paint. That think about, close your eyes and think about Murray running a pick and roll with Jokic and he goes down the lane, he shoots that little pocket pass. And then what does Jokic shoot that floater at? Like 112%, just that 8-foot little floater. Those are all gone because whoever's on Murray stays connected around the screen. They don't have to worry about switching. They're so horizontal that I think that's what's causing all this stuff. Now, with that said, did Joker have some shots that he makes last night? I think so, but his overall shot quality was probably the worst I've ever seen in a game from him. And then you add the 8 turnovers, which is the third straight game that he's had a ton of turnovers, because the other thing that OKC does is they get in the passing lanes. And so you're starting to see these plays where the strong side breaks down. Jokic does a no-look pass, 50 feet across the court to the weak side, which usually is a wide open 3. And Cason Wallace is like, I'll take that for a steal and go the other way. Or Aaron Wiggins. They just have so much length, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So that is definitely a lead story. The flip side is the other MVP candidate, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, almost essentially had an equally hard time in this game. I actually thought his process was quite good in the first half, maybe the first 3 quarters, because Denver's sending a lot of extra attention to them. And I know you want to get into Denver's defense and what they're doing, because last night was maybe the peak of Denver's defense, given the competition level and the opponent that we've seen in this entire run from them that they've been together. Their defense was incredible. And Shai kind of took the first 2-3 quarters of the game. You're going to show me extra bodies. I'm going to get Hartenstein his floater. I'm going to get a pick and pop 3 for Caruso. I'm going to get the defense in a little bit of rotation. We'll get Jalen Williams a weak side 3. I think he only had like 6 assists at that point or something, but he had created, 10, 12 shots by taking what the defense gave him. And then as it got really tight in the fourth, he was trying to score more, taking contested long jumpers. He actually makes, it's just like Jokic, he'll make some of those, but he couldn't buy one. And then he had this stretch where he's like, I think I need to hit a pull-up 3. I think I need to hit a dagger pull-up 3. I think he made the first one earlier in the period, and that was like his last score for the rest of the night. And then, 2 came short, 2 were in and out. Amazing game to see both of the MVP candidates just get basically hosed by the defense like that. What's Denver doing?
Well, they're definitely gapping hard, and that's something we knew teams were going to do going into the playoffs.
And when we say that, what's the core principle there? What do we mean when we say defense is gapping hard?
Let's say, the closest defender 1 pass away from the ball is just shrinking towards, let's say, if he is isolating in the middle of the floor, you're pulling over a few feet more than you normally would.
Yep.
And they might be doing that on both sides of the floor too, not just like if he's trying to get to his right hand or his left hand individually. That was definitely that's something they're not just going to let him play one-on-one. I mean, he just is basically unstoppable one-on-one. But I also thought, Christian Braun has started to understand his tendencies a little bit more.
Yes.
And with him matching him, sort of, if he can semi-match him, like on the initial, whatever, Shai's initial hesitation dribbles or whatever he's doing, crossing over to get into the paint. And you sort of dial up the physicality a little bit too. They're not calling hand checks as much. He's not getting the same whistle that he did during the regular season. Even a few of his shots where I think in maybe the latter part of the fourth quarter in OT where Brown was body to body with him, he might get that call if he's, sort of immediately pulling up in the mid-range and it's like a short mid-range or floater shot. He might be getting that call during the regular season, and he got none of those down the stretch. And then you mentioned sort of settling for a few shots, I thought. But Denver also just tightened up the screws. I think earlier in the game, I had noted a few bad defensive breakdowns. And even like, I would say the Thunder got some quality shots throughout the game where there was one play where it's off a made basket, I think, and Caruso sets like a screen on one side of the floor where there's no help behind. It's empty side, pick and roll, and just skirts in for a layup that he misses. But that's like a wide open shot, and I think Shea, his process could have been better, but they also just missed shots down the stretch.
Oh yeah, yeah. They had shots throughout the game. I actually think that was maybe the next top line item for me, which was Denver's shot making in this game was incredible. Jay Billis actually calls it out explicitly at some point in the third quarter, where he's just like, Denver's shot making is ridiculous. In the first 14 minutes alone, I think I marked like eight incredibly high difficult shots that they made from, Peyton Watson made 2 threes in this game. One of them was wide open, but even the first one he hit, it was pretty, like, the Thunder defended it exactly how they want to defend it. The ball gets in the paint. The defender takes a step toward the ball. They're so quick recovering to the corner. And with Watson, you don't want a hard closeout and run him off the line necessarily. You want a short closeout. Watson catches it. The defender's there. He still launches, drains it. Christian Brown had an exact shot like that in the corner. Michael Porter Jr., did he miss? I think every one of his shots, except the one in overtime. The one in overtime when he was open, finally, I was like, oh, good night. You're getting a kick out 3 after seeing all that defense the entire game. So on one hand, you have this incredible shot making from Denver, basically outside of Nikola Jokic. And then on the other hand, the Thunder, not only did they not make any difficult shots, but they missed things at the rim. You mentioned the Caruso wide open layup at the rim. Jalen Williams had a great game offensively, but it's just contrasting, especially in the first half. The first half, from a process standpoint, felt like it should have been a 10 or 15 point OKC lead. And you look at the score and it's tied. Obviously, that's the role players making shots, and then Jamal Murray and just some of the shots that he made throughout the night. In a game like that, where it gets really tight, it's really physical, scoring's a little bit harder, to be able to make, Mike, some of those like 18 or 20 footers, almost a throwback to 20 years ago, that kind of sort of resilient offense is such a difference maker. So that there's more, but like those were the biggest things that jumped out to me immediately.
Yeah, and this goes back to what we were talking about how the Thunder have defended Jokic so well. But did you see a few things that maybe Adelman drew up in the huddle or something versus the Thunder's set defense? It felt like Denver was throwing like all these crazy play calls, back screen into a dribble handoff into another back screen or something to free Jokic or to free Murray. It was just like they were throwing all their off-speed pitches, all their best stuff at the wall, because it was like
hats off to them, because the stuff they were running, both out of timeouts, whistles, sidelines, and some of these are called plays. They're designed plays. And I think, as an aside, one of the themes in these playoffs that we've talked about internally is like teams don't run a lot of plays right now. A lot of games sort of have turned into the mismatch hunting game. Who can I bring up to get, like, the Celtics play like this, right? The Celtics always play like this. Tatum and Brown and maybe another White or whoever they can get the mismatch with, Porzingis if it's a small toward the basket. But not every team, most teams in the NBA don't run their regular season offenses like this anymore. There's a little bit more motion, 3-man action, play out of the elbow. You get the bigs at the top. Cody's always up here talking about delay with a little dribble handoff action, right? And what we've seen across most of these teams and most of these games is, I'm just going to mismatch hunt, give the ball to my best player, find a weakness on the defense. And so the whole game becomes, how can I bring up into the screening action? How can I set this up the way I want? Is the defense stationary, or can I get some motion to distract what's happening? When I get a mismatch, am I going pure ISO? If you switch, am I throwing it into the post against a big who has a small on him? That's become so much of the playoffs this year. And that's always been a playoff element for me, but the difference feels starker than ever, because the regular season offenses had so much flow. They had so much juice. They had so many principles that have been built upon over the last few years to be really difficult to defend, activating all 5 players at high speed, in motion, multiple screens. And then you turn it on, you're like, oh, this is the 38th possession in a row I'm tagging where they're trying to bring Jalen Brunson into the screening action. I say all that to say the Nuggets' base offense is really about Nikola Jokic in the center of the court. It's really about him getting touches at the elbow, 2-man game with Murray, getting to the post, backing down, and seeing how the defense is going to react. So the Nuggets don't have to play like that. They decidedly are already a team that still has the same offensive identity that they've had throughout the regular season. And then to your point, in this game, probably very much as a response to the game 2 blowout and everything that happened with that Thunder defense, all the turnovers they always force, you say, okay, I want to limit turnovers as a coach, and I want to get our guys good stuff, and I want to drop specific things to kind of punish the way the Thunder maybe cheat a little bit or defending, sticking to Jokic with the beefy big or whatever. We could try to count them. We must have had 10 or 12 play calls in the game that I immediately wrote down, like, that was nasty. That was like 2 guys in the corner. You send another guy on the baseline. You expect this other thing. Somebody slips, and they just, like, credit to the Thunder. The Thunder defense is so good. There weren't even like explicit breakdowns, but Denver was running from a process standpoint that was like, we're going to throw our best stuff in here, and it's going to get Aaron Gordon a little movement 3 in the corner. Apparently Aaron Gordon can't miss threes anymore, so that's a good shot. We're going to get they had another one, and I can't remember if it was after a timeout or if it was just improvisation that really jumped out to me. They like to run the handoff with Nikola Jokic, right? They had 2 guys come up for the handoff instead of just one. And that creates a slightly different thing when you start sending multiple defenders screeching out of the corner toward Jokic. The pet play that the Nuggets run where Jokic is at the elbow and Jamal Murray gets a screen and then comes up for the handoff. They were running multiple versions of that. Jokic was the guy getting the screen and coming up and getting the handoff from the small. They were spamming big plays where they had Jokic and Gordon. Jokic is the initiator. So they just were doing this all night. So hats off to the Nuggets, throwing everything at the wall and just doing everything possible to win that game.
Yeah, and I think they were doing that because you cannot waste possessions against OKC. Because if you were just to run sort of a vanilla spread pick and roll or whatever, there, Dort is getting into the ball, Caruso is getting into the ball. You're just not creating, the advantage that you really want there. So I feel like a lot of those also involve, Murray coming off a back screen into a handoff, like just trying to get him and them, the Thunder, sort of on the move or chasing him in the first place, because they're sort of, if you were to just run basic offense against them, there are no advantages. They have pretty solid defenders at basically every position. And I also think it's good for I think there was a play that jumped out, I think it was out of a timeout, where there was, 2 guys at the elbow, and then maybe Michael Porter Jr. got like a flare screen, back screen sort of from Jokic without anybody on that side of the floor. So he was able to get going. I think the more you can get, or you can get Gordon on seals on the inside, I think they're just looking to create the marginal advantages for their guys in those spots as much as possible, because otherwise I think OKC can kind of just put you in a chokehold like we saw in game 2.
Yeah, that's a really interesting development for me going forward in the series, which is basically, can the Nuggets find a way to create the advantages we typically associate with these kinds of things? Like, they're all marginal advantages, which is why the shot making quality in game 3 stood out so much, I think, because as much as you're doing, and I can't remember if we talked about this on the pod or if this was something we discussed internally, but we know the Nuggets can kind of get okay shots. The question is there a way to crack the Thunder defense and get really good shots that you're just feasting? You're wide open through. It's funny because in the Celtics series, which we'll get to a little bit later, I want to talk about the Cavs and Pacers first, but the Celtics series, there's the whole discussion about like their shot quality, and it's great that you have nice shot quality, but you're missing shots. But a lot of the shots are good shots. And so you can differentiate, you can separate, like this is kind of rushed, or this is Cody and I were talking about this last episode. Like you take a three, comes off, you get the rebound in the corner, you pick it up, you turn around, you take another three. Technically, that's an open three, but that's not necessarily a great three. But if your process is good and you're attacking and collapsing the defense and swinging and getting these rhythm threes for really good shooters, we usually don't worry too much if you have a 10 for 40 night, because it's going to be the one time in a month that you shoot 10 for 40. With Denver, it's interesting because that's what the Thunder feel like. I'm like, is anyone going to show up and make a shot? Because I think the Thunder are typically getting a lot of the shots that they want. The Nuggets, by the way, mix some zone in as well, which we have to talk about the zoning, because it feels like that's such a curveball for teams. They're doing such a great job zoning right now. And I thought the Thunder, to their credit, probably did the best job of any team I've seen in the last few weeks. See the zone right away and then just know exactly how they wanted to carve it up. And they got some of their best offense early in the game. The shot quality was incredible. Just being like, okay, yeah, we know you're going to zone, but we know how we want to attack the zone. And maybe your zone in Denver isn't the same zone that the Houston Rockets ran with the double bigs and the matchup and somebody's chasing Curry. And then the latest one we've seen, which changed game 3 in the Pacers series, was the Cavs zone. I don't know if you want to jump to that or if you have any more thoughts on Denver before we put them to bed.
I think one final thought, what I meant to say earlier was that Denver had some defensive breakdowns in the first half, in the first quarter. Murray, I feel like, can be a little leaky on that end. You could chalk it up to a number of reasons. Sometimes you feel like it's conditioning. Sometimes I really just think a few of those errors were just up to like focus, honestly, off the ball, not boxing out or things like that, or just allowing an easy blow by at the point of attack. But he was on Pat Beverly a clock in the fourth quarter in OT. He was riding up those shorts, and he was pressuring the ball. I think there was one play I remember where Jalen Williams, who kind of had it going that game, J-Dub, sort of tried to break him down and spun into the paint, and Murray and someone else got their hands in there and got a key strip, I think in OT.
It's all a blur. Yeah, who can remember?
But like you were talking about a little bit earlier, that was the most buttoned up I've seen Denver defensively this entire season, probably, in the second half of that game.
Well, I thought Westbrook's defensive minutes were really good, and I don't remember any like quote unquote bad Westbrook. Peyton Watson's rim protection continues to be massively key. He officially had 2 blocks, but he altered a couple other shots. Of course, he had that incredible block. Was it on Chet?
Yeah.
Roll. That was just a highlight block for the ages. Just the physics of that, the way Chet is such a thin guy and likes to dunk, and was like moving toward him, like this sort of beautiful object coming toward the hoop, very vertical with his body. And then it was like a video game. You know what I'm talking about? Like a magnet, like Peyton Watson then vertically hit him and just repelled him backwards away from the hoop. That was absolutely incredible. But just like pulling up the technicalities on the box score. Here it is. Yeah, okay. They do have a ton for Murray, because he made a ton of plays defensively as well. He was responsible for some of those leaks. Absolutely. Like he was the guy every time we went back. Jokic had one where he forgot he was guarding like Lou Dort or something.
Yep.
Total breakdown. But Murray had a couple, screen navigations, forget the rotation, but then he also made a bunch of big plays. He made a great play in transition defensively with his size on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander down the stretch of the game. And so here it is. One of them was called a block, and then he had 4 steals in this game. And so again, a key, like you're never going to stop the Thunder from thundering. And that's just what makes their defense and this team the way they are. And that led them to 68 incredible wins. But for Denver through overtime, for the non-Jokic players to only have 8 turnovers, I thought was huge in the game. And the stocks for the Thunder, that's steals and blocks combined, I think they were over 20 in the first 2 games. I think they were over 20 in, I can't remember how many of the regular season games, but certainly some of the ones we deep dived. And then to see at the end of this game in overtime, they finished with 13. I think that's the kind of win that the Nuggets need, because then again, you don't get that defense to offense. So you start to chip away at the defense to offense. You make them attack you in the half court. And what did you think of the Thunder half court process in the last like 6 or 8 minutes of regulation and then overtime? Did anything sort of jump out to you? Did it feel like it was more of what the Nuggets were doing, or I don't know, because that's when they just couldn't score.
I think the game just slowed down a lot, but I don't know if this gets at what we were talking about before of like, should they have had more set plays run? Do you think that they were sort of trying to mismatch hunt a little bit too much? Maybe I would have liked to see Jalen Williams get a few more touches. Maybe you set a screen down for him in the corner and have him come off and see what you can do out of that, and maybe use Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's gravity away from the play to sort of open up looks in around the rim. I mean, it was also like, I think Denver sort of baited a few of their guys. You know, Hartenstein had 3 misses from short mid-range and a bad miss around like the 3:30 mark of the fourth quarter, where we were talking about earlier with Jokic, when he catches the ball in the pocket, he's at whatever you think, 80%. Hartenstein, I mean, that guy is automatic. But then in the fourth quarter in OT, it was like one of those landed in my living room.
Well,
like,
yes,
you know,
because he took it from the baseline.
yes.
And they had the stat in the game, which apparently he shot 82% on the floater specifically. And I was like, I wanted to like go into the TV and tell Jay Billis, I'd be like, but that's in the paint. He shoots them straight at the basket. You don't see him take that shot a lot on the baseline. And he had like 2 or 3 in this game on the baseline that it got a little windy. Let's put it that way, right? The last thing on this series for me in my notes, sticking with Jamal Murray and Shai. And by the way, in terms of process, what I would like to see if Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is going to have it at the top and they're going to show all these bodies in front of him, like what's becoming so common right now. I would love to see a little bit more cutting, and some cutting mixed with, we're seeing the pin-in screens and little flare. You mentioned Denver had a couple great plays where they had a flare screen on the weak side. So when the ball changes sides, or if you're the ball handler and you come, you're on the right elbow, you start moving back to the left, that occupies defenders, and that doesn't make it quite as easy to load up. And in fact, Shai had some of his, and this is why I credit him for most of the game sticking with the process. Some of his best drives in like the second or third quarter and getting into the paint came off those little pieces of flare movement or something that occupied the defense. And then he can have a small gap to drive into. The finishing and the foul drawing is a whole nother thing. Cody, I think that we've talked about like what players are most affected by physicality. And I don't know, maybe we'll try to do this list on Tuesday when we do our normal show. If you're catching this, Cody and I, we got our normal show. You can go back and listen to it on Tuesday. But sometimes we have to jump in with these. There's so many things happening with these series right now. And it's like, I don't know the list yet, but I know Shai's somewhere on the list because the hand checking specifically, you can see it when you start slowing down the film on a number of these plays, especially in the second half. I totally agree with you. Brown has done a great job studying his tendencies, and he's getting a little more dialed in. He had a great contest. I think did he block him once? I mean, he's starting to time up that length and the feel and all that stuff. But you can start to see it when like Shai actually gets him on a move, like a hesitation, step back, crossover, and he gets by him. Brown sticks his arm out, holds his shoulder. Exactly. And this is what's happening all around the league. And so it's hard to make like a list of who's being affected the most, but what I do know is that Shai is being affected and, stalling out the offense a little down the stretch. I don't know if you have more thoughts on that, but I have another
Go for it.
Connect. Okay. So this is all happening, right? Jamal Murray is some sort of weird playoff ninja where I don't know what happens. He can't do it every game, but he gets the lather, he gets the flow, he starts getting going. And to me, that stretch in the fourth quarter where Shai started to get a little off tilt in terms of process, it felt to me like Jamal Murray was giving him a little of the big brother treatment, a little of the, Kentucky senior, Canadian national team senior, you're the guy now, but okay, why don't you make a 1-footed, 20-foot fadeaway with a guy in your face and do it like 4 or 5 times in a row? And then in addition to that, the defensive plays that Murray was making down the stretch. And I just had I have no idea, just had a little note. I was like, is Shea pressing because of the literal dynamic between those two players? Because that's when it felt like he started to get a little too trigger happy with some of the shots, specifically some of the 3-pointers down the stretch of that game.
Do you think Jamal Murray needs like a family emergency just to get out of bed? Like he
Yes.
just like runs towards chaos because he just needs to feel something. Like he can only play in like high level, intense environments. I also think that was I really like Murray. I think has a good feel for the game sometimes in the sense of like understanding time and score and what the game requires, especially with how Jokic was struggling from the field. Like maybe hunting his shot a little bit more down the stretch, even looking to get to the line. I thought he drew a few fouls in the second half, I remember. But I mean, some of those where he gets like Hartenstein on a switch and just hits like a 20-footer just fading over him are just absolutely ridiculous. I think you kind of just have to, shake his hand and move on if you're OKC with a few of those. But I also think he was giving them all of his punches. Like he was like, you little hand tussling off the ball to get free from Dort, setting him up, sort of putting a shoulder into him so he can get free, all the dribble combos just to get into the paint. I mean, he had an incredible finish over Chet at one point, like in air sort of adjustment.
The reverse layup thing or whatever.
My God,
that was.
I mean, Brown had another good contortion over Chet, who's just got these like Jack and the Beanstalk arms over him.
The volleyball block.
Yeah.
The two-handed thing that he does. Yeah. Question from the audience is whether OKC struggles because they haven't played close games in the regular season. I never buy that. If the makeup of the team sort of would change something in close games and there's a reason to think that you're going to struggle, sure, but they were great in close games during the season. And then, maybe outside of the first Cleveland game, the other kind of huge monster games they played during the year, outside of that, and, when they have to play the darn Minnesota Timberwolves, I think those are the exceptions. But every team loses games. I was thinking about this game and looking at this game and looking at OKC's inability to make threes in this game. And it reminded me a little of when they played Milwaukee in the NBA Cup. And my dad texted me after that game because my dad's like a casual, and he texted me. He's like, OKC's no good. And I'm like, well, yeah, when you go like 5 for 40 from 3, it's kind of hard to win an NBA game. But I don't know if you know this, but they very rarely lose an NBA game. Let's transition to this other series because I want to talk about zones and Pacers Cavs. Cavs come out in game 3. They're finally healthy. We have to tip our cap to the basketball gods for getting us back to full strength. They come out with an explosion, absolute home run. I think they were up like 20-8, 11-0 and 20-8, something like that. The pace is there. They look great. You can feel Evan Mobley on both ends of the court. All of a sudden, the Pacers start pacering, and the game is very competitive. We're getting good shot quality, good physical, intense action on both ends. My God, the quality of basketball is so good right now, Mike. The intense, knock on wood for no more injuries, because the intensity is just it feels like it's at a 10 already. It feels like we're in the NBA Finals. I don't know if there's another level. It feels physically, humanly impossible. Maybe this is like a David Goggins situation where we're just going to go to the next phase of what's humanly possible.
Burn the boats.
Yes. Like people will be able to jump over the backboard by the time we get out of the NBA Finals. But all this is happening. Second quarter, Cleveland Cavaliers come out with like a 3-2 zone, maybe a jumbo version with, my favorite was Evan Mobley at the top of the zone, completely changed the entire tenor of the game, completely threw the Indiana offense right off its axis. And all of a sudden, before you know it, it's a 20-point lead. That was basically all I know there was a run in the second half and all that stuff, but man, did that change the game. And it's yet another zone that we're seeing. These are all different zones, and they keep having this profound impact against really, frankly, good NBA playoff offenses. It's incredible.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to touch on what you think sort of the main tenets that make that zone so effective are, or I can start there. But I mean, they also used DeAndre Hunter, who luckily was back for game 3, in sort of the middle of the zone. And one thing I was double checking on when I was watching game 3 was once they had switched to zone, I was like, okay, how have they played the Pacers in zone during the regular season? So I went back and like watched a few plays. I was like, oh, this is just a sort of vanilla 2-3 zone, you know, that you normally see. But adding the third guy at the point of attack and then putting a guy with length in the middle of that zone just completely changed the dynamic. Because with Evan Mobley back and Hunter to some degree, because he's long and has long arms or whatever, you still can keep a big man low, which is important, I think, on the floor. But then adding more length to the Pacers, all their guard stuff, you know, getting Halliburton downhill, how he likes to do that in pick and roll, adding a third player to the equation just completely shut them off. And then you have like Aaron Nesmith throwing the ball to some girl in the first row, or what, you know, Ben Mathurin throwing it to the Cavs bench. Like, the thing is, though, is I was checking the numbers, and it didn't actually force a ton of turnovers, but it just completely took them out of their rhythm and their process of what they normally like to do. Yep. Was just, you know, driving kick, you know, Halliburton's throwing no look, you know, roll passes to Miles Turner, all sorts of stuff like that. It just kind of neutralized that aspect of the Pacers offense, I felt.
Well, the other thing specifically in this series, and we've talked about it with some member content, patreon.com/thinkingbasketball, you can get that. Or if you just want videos, YouTube membership. And we had this concept after game one of like, well, if the Cavs are going to switch, and they were switching everything in game one, it creates mismatches to go after. The Pacers don't even need to be this very deliberate, calculating, mismatch hunting team. It's just an organic part of their offense. Halliburton runs pick and roll. They'll bring Miles Turner up. Well, hey, if you're going to defend this by switching with Jared Allen, now we've got mismatches galore. And there were a few plays very early in this game where everyone was at full strength, where you're like, oh, there's a Darius Garland. Okay, you are a mouse in the house. That is a layup in the post, or you have to give a foul immediately. And I think Garland had 4 fouls in the first. Before halftime. He picked
before
up his
halftime. I think he had 3 in the first quarter, though.
Yeah. So this is what happens. You go to the zone, that goes poof. It disappears. There's no more mismatch hunting when you go to the zone. The second thing that happens when you go to the zone, and they didn't, to their credit, they didn't do it every possession, because sometimes if you do it every possession, the offense will kind of start to pick up a pattern, and they'll be like, okay, last time I was so close, I just need to ball fake. And now I ball fake, and I know you're going to go there. What the Cavs did was they run some zone, then they go to a man. And then run some zone, they go to a man. And so every time you see that zone, it kind of stands you up offensively. You got to stop and think for a second. And that bleeds shot clock. Okay, what are we doing? We're going to swing the ball. Who's going to go? And you start seeing you go to the corner. You go to no, you run over here. Someone get me a sandwich from the deli. Like, I need to figure out how I'm going to attack this. Shot clock's at 8, right? And then your possession's busted. Those are the 2 big things. The third thing that you alluded to, these aren't vanilla zones. And so the lineage of this is like, we didn't have zones for a long time. Then we had zones. When people went zone, when teams went zone, it was often like the Mavs would go zone with like Dirk Nowitzki and Steve Nash. And it's just like, all right, we got to survive. We got to do anything to protect certain players. And the last number of years, last 4, 5, 6 years, what we started to see is the zones be more proactive, more creative. We had a huge video on the Warriors defense in 2021-22 season on their 1-2-2 zone, which was a derivative of an old college zone that Steve Kerr ran with Lute Olson. And then you get to the Heat, and the Heat in like 2023 really started to take these principles from college and make the zone a no-3 zone. And that's the big thing to take away. You know, you asked about the dynamics of the zone. We could maybe mention a principle or two, but it's really hard to explain on the radio. But what's not hard to explain is that these zones are stretching to the perimeter, and they're being smart about that. And so what are the principles of a lot of these zones? Well, mostly don't let penetration or a catch in the middle of the floor at the free throw line with no one around, because then you're punctured, then you have to collapse. So you still have to find a way to take that away. But also, don't let shooters be wide open in the corner. This is not a high school zone where we sit in our spots near the basket, and if you want to shoot over the top of us, you can. So we have to stretch out there, and then it goes full circle back to your point, Mike, which is when in the Cavs case, they bring those 3 guys up to the point of attack. So you have a guy at the top and 2 guys next to him, And now you're kind of like walling, you're protecting the 3-point line, but you're also walling off any penetration, any ball screens that teams like to run against that zone to try to dribble and penetrate into the zone. The Rockets had an amazing zone against the Warriors. The Warriors have been running 1-3-1 zone. This Cavs zone with Evan Mobley at the top, it's giving me a little of Kevin Garnett at the top of the Minnesota zone vibes from like 20 years ago. The problem with the Minnesota zone was the rest of the defenders weren't very good on the team and didn't always know what was happening behind him. So I don't know. This is a really exciting trend that I think is super forward facing in the future of basketball, because I think zones, hybrid zones, disguise zones, man into zone, zone into man, this is what it takes to stop these offenses. And I think this is why when you can throw one of these pitches in almost a surprise situation in these series, it can create such an immediate advantage that the teams then have to go like, I gotta go in my hole for 24 hours with all my coaches and figure out how am I going to attack this damn zone when they bring it up for like 6 minutes in the second quarter randomly.
You know what this is just reminding me of is I was immediately thinking about how man defenses have obviously like a lot more zone principles now. Like you even saw it in the Wolves-Lakers series. Anthony Edwards was like, I thought they were running kind of a zone. And really it was just they were shrinking the floor. The defenders that weren't guarding the ball were just shrinking into the driving lanes because they couldn't stop him at the point of attack. It's kind of the inverse of that with zones having more man principles, where it's not they're just standing back and just sitting on a spot on the floor. You know, if guys are cutting through, they're making sure they're communicating. If someone drives, and let's say for the Cavs, maybe it's Jared Allen or Max Strus steps up to pick up the ball, or Evan Mobley if he's lower, then the guy who is guarding the ball is switching out and peeling off to the man in the corner.
Exactly.
And I think that is like the communication has to be really dialed in when you run this type of thing, because it's easier if you're in middle school or high school to just sit back in a 2-3 and guard your spot, but it's way more effective if you can still use some of those man principles while you're in this zone.
But it's such a great point, because the zones, especially the ones we've seen in these playoffs from the Rockets, the Cavs, the Warriors do it a little bit. It becomes more matchup, meaning you want to stay connected to a guy. You don't want just want to be like, I'm in my spot. There's a shooter over there. I'll close out to him because he's in my spot. So the zone is becoming more man. The man is becoming more zone. And all of this stuff is blending together. There was a play last night back to the Nuggets game where the Nuggets were running zone. Then they came out of the zone and it was a man possession. And the way they switched, it was one of those things where like the broadcasters are getting confused and they'd be like, we're in a zone, even though it's man, because what's actually happening is everyone's matched up the way they want to in a man. So it's not a zone, but I need to use zone principles to defend in the NBA. So I need to send an extra defender into Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's driving gap. And this other guy, another thing they were doing, the Nuggets defensively, is Shai would run pick and roll. And then the guy that would roll, the defender wouldn't follow him. I'd be like, that's cool. You can go into the corner. We've got a guy or two there to zone you up, right? And I'm going to stay here and help on Shai. And so then when the ball starts getting pinged around the perimeter and you need to decide who's going to go where, you'll see this scram switching and players behind the play. To me, this is the entire direction of how the smart teams are going to defend going forward. And it's really cool to see the zones take on the man principles and the man take on the zone principles. Maybe they'll just meet in some perfect, it's like the unified theory of physics. Maybe we'll just get that in basketball. We'll just get the unified theory of defense at the end of the day.
And one aspect of the Cavs Pacers dynamic I really like is what you were talking about how it sort of just stalls the offense for the first like 5 seconds of the possession at least. And when you have guys with length in the middle at the top of the zone, Andrew Nembhard's now standing 30 feet away from the basket, trying to make an entry pass to Miles Turner instead of closer to the perimeter, actually. So they sort of push the offense out on the court, you know, semi-intentionally, because you're just trying to still put a little bit of pressure on the ball, but that's making the offense back away in a sense.
Can we talk about Donovan Mitchell for a second?
Yes.
Let's see. I'll pull up his numbers in a bit. We can play some stats corner because there's some crazy stats so far in this second round. But let's see. Finishing, absolutely incredible. I want the way these guys are defending and playing the Morey ball, 3-point line, layups, foul, paint, take away the paint, don't foul. So many guys in the league, there's a small opening and they come down the lane and there's defenders there and they're like, oh my God, I can't try to score over defenders. Like Jamal Murray's in the paint. I have to get out of here. I got to dribble back out or I got to pass it out. I got to keep it on the carousel. We got to find a 3 or a layup somewhere. And I love players in these playoffs that have the ability to get to that next level. And then, yeah, if there's like 3 guys at the paint and one of them's Victor Wembanyama, don't force it. But if you have the skill to finish into and around players and finish in traffic, that is a game-changing skill right now. And that's what I see when I see the Cavs get like Donovan Mitchell is like, I don't care how many people are in the lane right now. I'm going to spin. I'm going to jump. I'm going to hang. I'm going to do a 180. And then I will find a way at the end. It's like that Jamal Murray layup that was crazy, but Mitchell does that like twice a quarter. And then
he's like 10 more inches off the ground or something. It's like he's got to be the most fun driver in the NBA right now for me.
In the playoffs. I think he's easily. Yeah. Yeah. So you have that, you have the ball handling and the way he's like, we talk about these coverages and we talk about switch hunting. Well, bad news if you're being guarded by Andrew Nembhard. Your life is not going to be enjoyable for the evening. Like you're not going to have a nice night out with Andrew Nembhard. So much of the success comes from getting Andrew Nembhard off of you. But Andrew Nembhard is really good at getting around screens. So we can't get Andrew Nembhard off of you all the time. So what do you do if you're Donovan Mitchell? You do stuff like Nembhard's chasing me around the pick. He's not going to switch. He's not going to get picked. The big man is coming up into the coverage. Maybe he's at the level of the screen. I am just going to throw the ball out there, cross back over, jump and split through the 2 defenders, and then go to the basket and dunk on everyone, or throw up a floater, or skip it 50 feet into the corner to a shooter. That's his answer right now. And so far, it's working. It's absolutely incredible.
I also like it because he's still like he's playing within himself, within reason. It's like, controlled explosions. You know what I mean? He has a good feel for like, how to manipulate his tempo and stuff like that.
Why did you make that face when you said controlled explosions?
I don't know, man. I mean, I'm just visualizing some of these drives he's having where he's just, I will say he does get the small guy tax a little bit.
Okay.
I know.
What's the small guy tax? What's that?
It's the 2017-18 Isaiah Thomas corollary where you drive into the lane and you're a smaller guy and you fall on the ground and they call a foul.
Okay.
So he had a few of those with Miles Turner kind of being like, well, did he really foul him much? Or, Mitchell's just flying in there.
It doesn't matter though, because it's an and
one.
Still
makes
but
he
makes the shot. Yeah. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, very, very small sample, but just fun with numbers. In the 3 games in this series, if we look at our box score models that we use around these parts, patreon.com/thinkingbasketball, Mitchell's averaging 42 points per 75 in this series. 42 points per 75. He's second in our box model overall, slightly above efficiency and true shooting percentage, but slightly above positive, but 42 points per 75. I believe, there is not another player in the second round right now over 27.4. Ben Mathurin has the second highest scoring rate in the second round at 27.4. Would you like to guess Jamal Murray's numbers in the second round?
Oof. I would guess
it's just fun with small samples.
Something like Jamal Murray, man. 21 per 75 on -3.
So that's a fantastic guess. It's 19 on +1.
Okay.
That's such a fantastic guess. Nikola Jokic is almost always the king of box score stats, no matter what filter I run, what time period, who's involved. Like if he's in the sample, he's almost always number 1. It was one of the things that was so impressive to me about Shea's regular season is sometimes Shea would actually bump him to number 2, and you're like, okay, wow, this is a serious season to consider. In this round, in the 3 games, Nikola Jokic, 24 points per 75, -7% true shooting, And he has a turnover rate that's just off the charts. I'm not even going to mention it. It's literally, there's like one or two play. Rudy Gobert, I think, is the only player who has a higher turnover rate. And Rudy Gobert does nothing but catch the ball, dunk, or turn it over. That's all he does when he catches the ball.
I like when he gets loose on the break. It's sort of like they let a horse out of the stable or something like that. He's just sort of...
Slow motion fast breaks are definitely my favorite kind of thing. Okay, do you're definitely into this series quite a bit. Do you have any other thoughts before we finish up with the Celtics and the Knicks?
Well, I think we talked about Mobley in the context of the zone, Hunter a little bit, but I think just like getting Garland back and then all three of the guys together, it just sort of rounds out the team in a nicer way. I mean, Mitchell had to carry such a huge load in game 2. You saw Max Strus getting more usage, which was fine because I think he's been playing more confidently, getting more touches. But I mean, you even saw it on like the first possession of the game where Garland just greases the grooves and sort of takes one of their other good point of attack defenders out of the picture. Because I actually think Nembhard has been, they might want to put Nembhard on Mitchell because he might be their best point of attack defender. So then if Aaron Nesmith is on Garland, he can sort of do his little jitterbug thing and get into the paint, which then puts the Pacers in rotation. And even if Garland isn't scoring or getting an assist on that play, it just sort of makes the whole operation run more smoothly. And, same with if Mitchell's out of the game, and there was a stretch at the end of the first quarter, I think, where it was actually Mobley and Garland together, which is not their normal pairing. But, okay, then we'll just run a little inverted pick and roll for Mobley to get downhill, like he's shown all season that he can be aggressive with the ball in his hands off the dribble. And so just getting, more guys to sort of eat the innings. You have to play Isaac Okoro a little bit less. You have to play even Dean Wade a little bit less.
Yep.
You just have more. It actually turns out it helps to have 2 all NBA level players on, playing against a good team.
Yeah. And I think that point about, another good defender being occupied is such a subtle but powerful one, because even when it comes to switching screens or whatever, that's like another guy that's occupied. So if Nesmith ends up on Mitchell, you have to be careful not to let a non-Nembhard player on Garland, because then you could potentially have a mismatch issue there. Or it's just really like Garland's a good movement shooter, so he can stretch you off ball and things like that. So yeah, it's been great. I think that's a great shout out. And then Evan Mobley, just his presence on both ends and seeing the offensive improvement he's made, the ability to finish with strength and be powerful when he has space to attack in the middle of the paint. They really felt that. So man, we got 2 incredible series where the top seed is down. I'm not sure. A lot's going to happen real fast. So I'm not sure I'm going to emotionally come back to these series until we record on Tuesday with Cody, but it's absolutely incredible. The last one that's 2-1 is the Knicks and the Celtics. It's probably the least interesting to me of the 3 right now. The first 2 games in Boston were absolutely insane, and then it felt like the exact same game played on a repeat where it was literally a 20-point, almost like the same point in the game, right? Like the late third quarter, something like that, 20-point lead in both games, the huge comeback, both games kind of defined by obviously Boston's poor shooting, but to some degree settling for threes instead of attacking, and then becoming fixated on mismatch hunting either Brunson or Cat, constantly trying to get both of them involved in actions with Tatum or Brown. And then the offense kind of gets bogged down and stalls when, again, more physicality. Jalen Brunson could just be like, hey, man, I'm going to do everything I can no matter what to survive this possession. And to his credit, he's done a good job. I wanted it last series. I wanted them to switch a little bit more last series. And it's like, you don't have to avoid the switch every time. He's going to hold up okay. And that was the first 2 games. Game 3 today, which just ended, I thought the Celtics process was much more diverse. It was much better. They weren't fixated on just going after one of those 2 guys. They might start the possession by saying, we're going to go after one of them. But then if they don't get the switch, there was a play I want to say in the first quarter, it's all kind of blurred together, where Jaylen Brown was looking for that early switch on Brunson. They didn't get the switch, and Jaylen Brown had a ton of space on the wing anyway to play one-on-one against like Mikal Bridges. And he just is like, I'm going to play one-on-one, goes to the basket, and gets a score in an and one or something like that. That to me is the process. Hey, we're going to run this pick and roll to try to get Drew Holiday a short roll catch in the middle of the floor because he's so deadly there versus I have to dribble around until I get an isolation against Karl Anthony Towns. And then, hey, once I get an isolation against Karl Anthony Towns, did you guys know I could take a step back three? Did you guys know that? Like, to me, it's not night and day, but it's such a harder thing to defend when they attack like that. And that was a defining characteristic of game 3 for me.
Well, I think, you're just sort of letting the Knicks off the hook if you shoot that shot over Cat, who we even mentioned in the member video on kind of game 2 mostly, but a little bit of game 1, which is that, like, is it really the worst thing in the world to let Jaylen Brown dance against Cat and maybe shoot a contested jumper as long as you're maybe taking away the driving lane? Like, I think the Knicks or Tibbs will kind of live with that shot, and similarly with Brunson a little bit more too. You mentioned the switching. But then I thought it was kind of hilarious. I was just checking the box score numbers. Game 2, the Celtics shoot 10 for 40 from 3.
Mm-hmm.
Game 3, they shoot 20 for 40 from 3. Turns out, you
having
shoot the exact same number,
yeah,
you shoot 25% better is actually good for your team.
Yeah, the 30 extra points made a difference. So they end up winning by 22, although there was a lot of a little pure garbage time, but the game never really got close again after the Celtics made that huge push to extend the lead to 20 something in the second quarter. But to your point, it's like, and I think we said it in the video, 25% is not something you want to bank on as a defensive strategy. Maybe the true value of these threes in the intensity of these games, with the fatigue, with the cognitive load from all the things you're trying to put in and the scouting that you have to remember. Okay, maybe it's not 37%, whatever the second spectrum shot quality expected field goal percentage equation is. Maybe it's not perfectly 37%. But Mike, there's a huge difference between like 25% of your threes going in and 31% of your threes going in when you take 50 threes. In fact, it turns out that's 9 points per game. And when you're playing games that go into overtime, those 9 points might help. So I do think, as an aside, the Celtics shot quality and the process was cleaner today. So a lot of those threes, especially earlier in the game, were just like, hey, this is almost a breakdown in a sense. There was one where Karl Anthony Towns didn't come up high enough. Actually, he had a couple of possessions where he didn't come up high enough on a screen. That creates a major issue because you either have a wide open shot at a very comfortable level. You're not 29 feet away or 25 feet away, or you get the dribble penetration and the breakdown. And after the second or third one, OG Anunoby was like yelling. He's like, you gotta get up higher. And then, you could see that adjustment on the very next play. Or there are things like Peyton Pritchard's a great shooter. You want Peyton Pritchard. He's got that Steph Curry thing. Like, he's in there to take volume threes. So it is a legit breakdown if in whatever you're doing behind the play, avoiding a switch, whatever, like Peyton Pritchard just runs down the court. They set up a little screen. He comes off the screen and absolutely no one is around. That's a problem. So those are great threes for the Celtics. And I think when they're looking for post touches and not overly obsessing going after Cat and Brunson, I think that shot quality is going to continue to be there.
Yeah, I even think stuff like, okay, if you're like having Derek White screen for Tatum, one of them gets downhill, maybe you hit the short roll, you have Drew Holiday near the basket, sort of in the short corner area or something, just getting some looks out of that. Maybe he then flows into a dribble handoff with someone. I mean, they don't play this big like motion movement style of offense, but I think actually making the Knicks work and making it easy on yourself by not just having to create an isolation is just a no-brainer. And it's good that their process was less about maybe reaching that specific number of threes they're going to shoot, but sort of them becoming a byproduct of creating advantages in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's when they're at their best. Absolutely. I can't believe this. Nikola Jokic does not lead the playoffs anymore in our box plus minus model. I think this is the first time. I literally think this is the first time this has happened since, like, I don't know when. I was going to say 2022, but he might have that year, even though they got eliminated. It might be like the first time in 5 or 6 years that he has not led because he's actually not even close right now after the disaster class of game. He was so funny after game 3. He's like, yeah, I was the worst player out there for most of the night. It was not good. Do you want to guess who's first in our playoff model?
Is it Donovan Mitchell?
It's Donovan Mitchell. Yeah, it's Donovan Mitchell. He's been absolutely incredible. If you're interested in that, patreon.com/thinkingbasketball. It's the best way to support us. And that's where we have our playoff stats board that updates throughout the playoffs. We got other stats and things like that. Extra content. That's the video content that we make. That would be, if you're interested in watching basketball, moving pictures, patreon.com/thinkingbasketball. You can also get that on YouTube. Any other thoughts before we get out of here? Yeah, go ahead.
Who else is at the top of the list for box plus minus right now?
Giannis is very good in his series. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Evan Mobley.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Although the model does love, I think it's correct in this case, but it does love big men who like show the profile of being a very good defender, rebounding, blocking shots, things like that. Because true box stats are so limited defensively. So sometimes it can over-index on big men that it thinks are good defensively. But in this case, I think it's actually right that like Mobley is quite good defensively. I think he was the defensive player of the year in the NBA? Is that
couldn't have been Giannis? It over-indexing on that a little bit. No. Okay.
Oh, defensively? Yeah. Why are you doing this right now, Mike? Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to get me in trouble? How are you feeling about these playoffs?
I'm feeling electric. I mean, just the Nuggets Thunder thing is just incredible. I mean, I've obviously loved watching the Thunder all year, but I was quietly like, oh, let's see what happens when they get punched in the mouth. And I think, I think it's interesting I think it was good that we discussed like some of these Nuggets role players having some crazy hot shooting, because it hasn't like it's not like OKC's process has been that bad. I think the end of game 1, Dagnall maybe could have made a few different coaching decisions.
Oh, you're still on that?
But I actually have a question for you. Is what did you think about how they went with the guys on the floor at the end of game 3?
Oh, did we not talk about that?
No.
Yeah, I said something when I was live watching right away that I did not like that they went away from the big lineup. And a lot of it had to do with that it's funny, but the beefy big thing, it's like a big note for me in the series. I'm like, they have made a concerted effort to make sure they have one of their strong big men physically strong, right? So the lineups that have Chet as the second big man, there was one possession, Mike, I don't know if you remember this, where Chet got switched onto a guard and he like navigated through like 3 screens.
Murray.
He's like, I am not leaving you no matter what.
That was crazy.
Chet is fairly agile. He's fairly mobile. His size creates some problems behind the play for Jokic, both as a help defender, but also hitting cutters coming through. And offensively, he's a really good shooter. Now he's 1 of 6. Most of his shots were really good in game 3, but I just thought that lineup combined with Shea and Jalen Williams and then pick another player, I thought that was the way to go. I would have even accepted Jay Will as a beefy big out there. Jay Will gives them a slightly different dimension because he's a pretty good 3-point shooter and he's pretty willing to take them. Hartenstein obviously wants to play downhill on the roll, and he's a great passer as sort of an elbow hub and a dribble handoff hub. So it's a different thing. But then the last thing to me was Cason Wallace. I mean, there's not many people higher on Cason Wallace than I am. Let's be transparent. But I love Cason Wallace, but also he had great minutes last night. Aaron Wiggins had great minutes last night. I just wanted to see those two guys more in the game, and I didn't love that move to go small and kind of take away some of those elements. And Caruso is amazing, but also Caruso's small, and Caruso, I think, statistically, either their weakest shooter in the core lineup by far, or somewhere, technically Hartenstein doesn't shoot threes, but yeah, it's interesting you asked me that, because I did have that as a mental note where I was like, I think you would like those minutes back with the big lineup.
I think it's easy to say in hindsight for sure, but but it's also kind of the funny thing about having so much depth is that it's like, oh, like what combo could we go with here?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, like, Dort offers a little bit more size at the point of attack, Caruso speed. Caruso also has like all those little off-ball attacks, but then it's like Cason Wallace can also do a decent job on Jamal Murray too. And then someone like Aaron Wiggins is more of a threat from three. I think his, whatever 3-year 3-point numbers are much higher than some
Amazing.
of the role players. But then it's like, okay, Dort's shot was off last night. So like, how much do you weigh the in-game sort of equation of like which guys you're rolling with at the time too?
Well, I think the preference for Dort is that when he's stuck in the Jokic switch, he can physically keep him from getting too deep.
Definitely.
Whereas as good as Cason Wallace is, he kind of has to surrender and needs someone else to come help. But I don't know. I wouldn't be overly concerned about that. I do love the idea of having like two of their crazy ball hawks on the court at all times. But you can't always do that. We have a quick question from the audience before we wrap up. It's the elephant in the room, Mike. I don't know why we tried to make it through the show without bringing it up, but they're not going to let us. The Warriors. How are with the Steph Curry situation? Do the Warriors have a chance? I mean, to me, I just think it's if he can make it back by game 5 or game 6, then they still technically are alive, so they have a chance. But maybe the more appropriate question is like, what kind of odds do you give Golden State? The game is about to start tonight. They'll have another one, obviously, without Steph in San Francisco. Do you feel like they can, like, do they have a 10% chance? Do they have a 30% chance? Like, what legit chance do they have without him?
I mean, I think they have a slightly higher chance at home without him, but even then, maybe it goes from like 15% to like 18% or something like that. I mean, it's just tough. It's just tough going. Like it's tough to create enough offense against Minnesota, long term. If you're, unless like Jimmy Butler has some crazy scoring explosion, which I kind of just don't see him having. I think even if he has like a big scoring game, that just does not guarantee that you're going to win it. Because, it's like, is Draymond's shot on? Is Pajemski's shot on? Do you get a 7-for-7 game from Kuminga or like a 2-for-8? It's like, I mean, I love Pat Spencer, but like,
I was going to ask you. Yeah.
I mean, I love Pat Spencer.
You were watching a lot of Pat Spencer minutes the other day.
Do I think he is ready to be unleashed against like Anthony Edwards and DiVincenzo at the point of attack? Maybe not.
I think that's how you beat the Wolves. I think you have to start. You have to play mind games. And you have to say, okay, you guys think Steph is out for this game? Jimmy's not even going to start the game. You make a big announcement. Jimmy needs to make coffee in the back in the first half. You start Pat Spencer over Jimmy. You start Quentin Post.
Get Guy Santos in there just sort of for a little something.
Well, now you're just being ridiculous, Mike. You can't get all three of those guys on the court at once. I was going to say Buddy Hield, Pajemski, and Kuminga. That's your starting lineup. You get up 43-38 at halftime before Minnesota knows what hit him. You put Jimmy Butler back in the game and you try to squeeze out a win. That's how you beat. If you told the Wolves that Curry was going to play tonight, they would win 120-95.
I like it.
All right. That was fun. We will be back our normally scheduled time with Cody on Tuesday. These are just the playoffs that keep on giving. So who knows if we might have to do yet even another emergency pod if the games keep up like this. Thanks as always for listening all the way through. Hope you're enjoying the playoffs as much as we are and that you are having a great day.